ASP.NET developers are quite familiar with user controls, which encapsulate chunks of UI and UI logic that are repeated across a site. This type of UI development is also present in ASP.NET MVC, and there are a few different ways of implementing it. In ASP.NET MVC, the term user control has been replaced with the term partial, even though they use the same mechanism, a .ascx file. And this is mostly to underscore the fact that they exist for display purposes only. In ASP.NET Web Forms, a user control might pull data from a database in order to render what it needs. Partials, on the other hand, adhere to the MVC pattern and are handed data from the controller using view data or from the parent view through the render partial method. But occasionally you might come up against a problem where you actually need that logic built in, where your partial is causing you to repeat queries, let's say, and logic across controller actions. Shopping cart information, for instance, on an e-commerce site. In this case, render action can help by rendering the results of a single action in line. It's a bit controversial, since in a strict sense it breaks the MVC pattern. The view is calling back to a controller. The flow is being broken. However, there is no denying its usefulness, and we'll take a look at that. Finally, partials and render action, they work well for basic reusability of UI code. However, with ASP.NET MVC 2, Microsoft introduced a brand new system for standardizing the editing and display of HTML using templates. Templates based on object types. These templates are based on the dynamic data system of templating based on the object type, simple or complex, and have a very unique pluggable system which you can readily extend for your needs. In this coming demo, I'm going to show you how to use render partial and render action, but I'm going to spend most of the time with the templating system. It's quite complex and quite deep, and I'll show you how you can customize it for your needs, and also show you some of the cliffs you could fall off. Back in episode 5, I restructured my homepage to be a lot more dry by using a combination of PhilHack's awesome HTML repeater class, which is this, and using partials for a lot of code that I needed to repeat throughout the list. And I think this looks nice and tidy. However, I just wanted to kind of touch on this a little bit more, that partials can contain partials as well, which might sound a little bit strange, but it follows the same concept that you might have with a user control. So, in looking at my UI, this is where a little bit of discipline might come in, or a little bit of practice. Looking at my UI, I am thinking that this list of posts, as well as having the pager down below, as well as having the admin links if I'm logged in, is something I might want to reuse across my site. Something that I might want to have in search results, perhaps, or I might want to have in a category listing. So rather than copy and paste this code all over the place, what I might want to do is stick this whole thing into a partial. Indeed, I can do that as well. So in this case, I might want to stick it under the home controller, because that's kind of the controller that's handling all the posts, or I might want to have it site-wide and put it in shared. So I'm going to have it site-wide because a category controller might handle this list, or a search controller might handle the search. Who knows? So what I want to do is I'm just going to add a view, and I'm going to call it post list. And I'm going to create a strongly typed view, and it's going to accept in an I enumerable of post. There we go. And I want to make this be a partial view. So I hit add, and there's my post list. There we go. And now what I can do is literally just copy and paste this entire thing. Now, it might look strange. How is this even possible? Well, remember, the model is the all-important thing here. So if I go over here to post list, again, we're going to have access to a model even if it's on a partial. Now, we have a bit of an issue. The model actually needs to be a paged list. IEnumerable will work, but we need to expose other properties and methods for the pager. So let's reset this to page list. There we go. And then back on my home page, now what I can do is, and to have this run, I just simply type in html.render partial and then post list. And making sure I remember that semicolon. That trips me up a lot. So now when I run this thing, you'll see that everything works exactly the same. That's pretty tidy. It would have been a nice exclamation point to drying up our view, But now our view is perfectly dry, and to prove it, we have one single output here. So this is good. So to kind of recap the whole point, I can output a list of posts complete with pager and links just by rendering this partial. Well, one last thing I want to show you is that this, again, trips up a lot of people. If you want to call render partial, you have to do it without the equal sign here, which is response.write, because render will render the output straight to the response stream. So this trips up a lot of folks. However, there is a workaround that I wanted to show you. Instead of calling render partial, you can just call partial. And this actually writes its response out to the page. So this returns a string. Now this is handy if you need to test, for some reason, the outputs of the partial. You can. However, there is a difference here that you're going to need to be aware of. And that is that this method will return a string back into this view, which in turn hands it off to the response to be written out to the stream. That's just a bit more circuitous than writing the response straight out to the stream from within the partial. So it's up to you how you want to handle that. But I tend to just leave it as render partial because I think it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to just reverse out, Control Z. There we go. Okay, well, those are partials. Partials work great for reusing UI logic, but what if we need to do more than that? What about a situation where I have a list of categories, let's say, that I want to show on every single page of my blog? That list of categories might have a link off to a category page where you can see all posts in that category. Well, in that situation, we are confronted with a little bit of a limitation if we are adhering strongly to the MVC pattern. What that would mean, basically, is we need to go grab for every single action, for every single page, if you will, on our site, we need to go grab that category data and then hand it down where it can then be handed off to a partial. This leads to a lot of duplication of code, a lot of duplication in terms of calling out to methods, and it can be a little bit of a refactoring nightmare. So what I want to do now is I want to utilize a function of MVC called render action, which will actually go and pull the contents from a controller's action and render it in line. Now I should mention to you, as I mentioned previously, again, this comes with a tad bit of controversy. Some folks don't like this. They think it deviates from the MVC pattern, and strictly speaking it does, because the flow is handed off to the view, which then again calls back to a controller and asks for more input. Now that's arguable, something that I consider to be okay, because if you think about using Ajax, well, that's kind of what's happening. If you want to call back to a controller based on some inline functionality, and then a response is handed back to you that you render in line, well, that's breaking the MVC pattern as well. So I think we can make an accommodation. However, it's up to you to do what you're comfortable with. Okay, well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to implement this, and so to keep with the RESTful way of doing things, I'm going to create a new controller, and I'll just click Add Controller, and I'm going to call this my category controller. And I will create the RESTful methods, which we'll talk about more later on. And inside here, I have index. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of code here. Here we go. And this couldn't be simpler. I'm just calling to the database, having it pull down iQueryable categories. And to add a view, I just right-clicked here and I hit Add View. And I asked it to create a partial for me, and I told it it was going to be of type category. And I've added some test categories to my database. All right, so then I created my view, as I mentioned, index.ascx. Now this is meant to be a partial, so that is why it is an ASCX. And I'm giving it a style here, as you can see, just to give it a little bit of padding and float. And then back on my index page, if I want to show it here, what I can do is I'll just drop this down a little bit, and I'm going to put it right at the top. And instead of calling render partial, I'm going to call it render action. And then here I need to give it an action name, index, and then I'm going to also need to give it a controller name. You know, this is a little bit of weirdness. You have to kind of scroll down to make sure that you can do that. Yes, we can, string controller name. And so in this case, I'm just going to call it category. Make sure to put in a semicolon. Now, in the same situation as render partial, we don't need to necessarily have this, because this is going to render right to the stream. We don't need to have it handled that way. We can actually do render, or excuse me, just plain old action. And I was thinking about this over the last hour or two, like when would you ever do this? And then it occurred to me that maybe you'd want to evaluate the return I've actually found myself in that situation a number of times. You might want to evaluate what comes back. If it's empty, you might want to show a certain thing. If it's not, well, you might want to have some logic based on the return. In this case, I don't really have anything like that. Ideally, if you have logic like that, it's supposed to be in the partial itself, but whatever. Leave it to you, however you want to do it. Okay, so we have our render action. This couldn't be much simpler. Let's run this and see how this looks now. And you can see, boom, there we go. Categories. When I was a kid, I remember watching Doug Henning and absolutely being mesmerized. I couldn't believe it. And I think like most kids, I loved magic. And I remember my dad even took me to go see Doug Henning at a live show. And I remember sitting there thinking, I know there's wires making him fly around. I can't find it. And I really dig magic. And same goes true today. I remember watching a special on this guy, David Blaine. If you ever get to see David Blaine on TV or anywhere, you got to watch it. The guy is a freak. The reason I bring up these magicians is that we are about to go into the realm of magic. There's no other way to describe the templating engine that drives ASP.NET MVC. And we are going to depart from the realm of the living into the realm of the supernatural is really what you're going to have to equip yourself to deal with. But a lot of people don't react very well when they think, I don't want frameworks to do magic, but that's what convention over configuration is about. The magic is the convention. You just have to figure out the conventions. And once you do, lots of good stuff can happen. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Specifically, what I'm going to do right now is work with jQuery. And I know there's a lot of debates about jQuery UI, but we're going to talk more about jQuery UI and actually how it can be your very best friend if you're switching over to MVC. How it can replace those controls, the server components that you lose, including the calendar, which is something I'm going to work on right now. Okay, so let's take a look at the create form that I have. And here is just my basic page. And if I can refresh it, you can see nothing really fun and anything wild going on. We just have a plain old text boxes. But as you know, typing into a text box isn't very much fun. So what I want to do now is I want to actually change this. And I want to change it using the templates. Now, the first thing I can do is I can just change this method call. If you think about it, this is sort of brute force. I want a text box. You're not really leaving much room open for, well, templating. You're not allowing yourself to change your mind in the future. Having a template is usually much better. So let's do that. And instead of having text box, I want to ask for an editor. And I can say editor 4. Now what editor 4 is going to do is it's going to go search inside of the application here, inside some special directories, for a template. And it would be really cool if it would actually find something for published on, but it's not going to look at the name of the property. Instead, it's going to look for its type, in this case, datetime. So we can work with that if we wanted to, but and I indeed will, but I'm going to show you right now what happens when I just refresh this. I'll show you that nothing at all is going to change. In fact, we still get the exact same output, which is great. All right, well, let's see how we can change that. So what I'm going to do is you come in here to the shared directory, and by default that is a good place to put it, and I need to create a directory called editor templates. Now I could also put this directory underneath the controller and have these templates confined to a specific controller. But I'm good with this being site-wide, so that's okay. Now what I wanted to do is I need to add in my template. And so up here, I'm going to create a new template called datetime because I'm creating, again, a template for an object. All right, so I'm going to create a partial, and I'm going to hit add. For those of you wondering, wow, that seems really strict. I don't like this convention. Don't worry. There's a lot of ways to customize it, and I'm going to show you all of those in just a minute. So in here, all I need to do now is just ask, not for an assembly directive, for html.textbox, and then what? Well, this is where things get interesting. As a reminder, we are working with templates. We are not working with partials. Now, if we were working with partials, we could just perhaps ask our model what the name is, or we could say textbox for model. But this is a template. So how are we going to do this? We don't know the name. We don't know the value, because remember, this is for all date time. Well, I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to really show you as we take a field trip into the guts of MVC and see how these things are put together. But for right now, I'll just show you. You got to leave it empty. And then for the value, you just set it to model. Remember, this is a view page, so it has got a model property on it. that's hanging off of view data, but we have no idea what it's going to be. But it is a view page, so model does get set somewhere. But how? And how does this name get set? We just left it for empty. We're relying on a little bit of magic. So to see how that magic rolls out, let's take a field trip into the guts of system.web.mvc. Well, if the explanation that it's all just magic doesn't really sit well with you, and you want to know more about, well, how all the pieces really fit together, sometimes what you got to do is to dive into the source code. And thank goodness the ASP.NET MVC team keeps all the source for MVC up on CodePlex. So I went and grabbed it and pulled it down to my hard drive. And one of the cool things about Phil, one of the many cool things about Phil, is that he really loves unit testing. So it just made our job a lot easier, made my job a lot easier, because I could, if I needed to, of course, I could just spelunk into the MVC source code, which isn't exactly small, or I could just hunt down the tests and then set a breakpoint and then follow the debugger all the way through the code to figure out how everything works. And that is precisely what I'm going to do. So if you look through here, it's pretty well put together, very organized. I think he and Brad Wilson have had a good time doing all this stuff. And inside here, we see we have an input extensions test. So I kind of went digging around in here, and I found all the way down, I'll collapse that down, all the way down on line 1600, and oh my goodness, that is a lot of tests. I found this guy right here. This is exactly what I'm looking for, and this test will do just fine. So I want to do two things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through TextBox4. Now I know we're using Editor 4. However, I think it's really good to understand what TextBox4 does in terms of working with the model metadata, a Groovy class I'm going to talk a lot more about in just a bit. It's important to understand what that does, and then I'll transition to Editor 4 and show you how the editor sort of overrides some basic settings, once again using the model metadata. So along the way here, I have tweaked the code just a touch, just to have a little bit of clarity so I can hover over things and show you in more detail what things are. And I'm, to be honest with you, I'm kind of used to rewriting Phil's code. So yeah, no, I'm not. I'm joking. Okay, so let's run the debugger. And off we go, and I'm going to collapse this window down. All right, so the first thing to understand is we are starting with some fake view data that has been handed to us. It is of type foobar model, and you can probably guess the properties that are on foobar model. We have property foo and property bar, and they are both strings, view item foo and view item bar. Okay, so as long as we know that, we can continue on here. We're going to grab our helper. This is our HTML helper, which we are going to use to write our text box, and we're going to pass it in m.foo, or foobar model.foo. That's what we're interested in. And that property, again, is set to view model foo. Okay, so let's step in now, and we can find ourselves sitting inside of inputextensions.cs in one of the many overrides for TextBox4. This is all basic stuff up to now. I'm sure you're probably figuring out that, well, there's got to be an expression translator in there that will pull out the name and the type, and sure enough there is. So let's just jump down to it. We're going to jump all the way down to the main method, and we are now inside of TextBox4 primary. And this is where we get to meet our new friend, model metadata. So what is this thing? Well, the helper method here is asking it, could you please go out and introspect, use some reflection, and tell me what this expression is working with? I need to know more about it. So you can think of the model metadata class as basically a reflection helper. It takes a look at the property, figures out a type, then it works with another class called Data Annotations, which I'll talk about more in just a minute, to see if there's any funky attributes on this class. Things that might tell us a little bit more about what to show on the UI, like display or certain type or whatever. So next step, after we have our model metadata, we can skip on over and we can ask for the value, and the model metadata class will tell us. Sure, it's just the model, it's here, it's view item foo. Cool. Next thing we need to know is the name. Get expression text, it tells us just this, and it's from expression helper. And so that'll tell us the name of the property we're working with. And then we got it, name, foo, val, view item, foo, good to go. Then we hand this off to the text box helper, and this signature should look familiar to anybody who's used the helpers before. So you got helper, and then you got val, which is the value you want to pass in. That is the second argument to html.textbox. Name, attributes, all good. So that is cool. That will help us understand that basically the expression is taken, the name is pulled out of it, the property value is pulled out of it, and then handed off to the helper so it can properly display a text box. That's all good, but what does this have to do with the editor? Let's find out. If we step into this expression right here, it's going to take us down into a few other overloads that we kind of have to jump into until we finally end up with the class, or the method that we're really caring about, which is input helper. And the line that makes all the difference in all the world. How do we know the name of this thing? Well, the interesting thing is the name has been passed into us. And if I scroll this over, it's foo. Get HTML field name, foo. We already know it. That's great. What if we didn't know it? What if this was an empty string or null? That's the case with the editor. If you recall, jumping back to our other project over here to our demo, remember this is empty. There is no name. However, our template info class that hangs off of view data knows that we're in a template. It knows it's a typed template. And when we say get full HTML field name, well, it'll come back with the template name based on the expression that we sent in. Aha. So that is how those editors know how to do this. So the name is looked up. Once again, checking out view context, view data, template info, get HTML field name. Well, wait a minute though. We haven't done anything to view data. This doesn't make too much sense. And in that, well, yes, you are correct. Okay, well, the rest is easy peasy from here. This is just your typical builder. Now what I want to do is I'm going to stop this test right here, go back to our input extension tests, get rid of that window. So now that we're back here, let's change the signature on here and take a venture into editor 4. So let's just hit run with the debugger. We're going to do the same thing, except this time we're going to skip over. Finally, I'm going to end up stepping into the method that I really care about, which is, and we arrive at paydirt. This will be explaining so much. Let's collapse this over here so we can get a full look at this guy. So what we're doing inside of here is we are rewriting, inside the template helper, we're rewriting the view data. So we're taking the original view data, thank you very much, and we are resetting the model here, resetting the model of the view data to the metadata model. In this case, view item foo. That's how we know what the value is. All right, and then the next thing we're doing is we're passing in the model metadata. We've already figured this out. We asked the model metadata, hey, help us out. What is it based on the passed in Lambda? Finally, we're adding a new thing that wasn't there before, template info. The template info is being created, once again, based on the model value, view item foo, there it is. Also an HTML field prefix. Now that's interesting. What is that thing? And if we scroll over, we can see that it's asking for get full HTML field name based on the existing template info. So now when the template itself asks what should my name be, the input builder, what should my name be, this will tell it. So you can look at this as a bit of an injection or interception routine where we're kind of intercepting the call here saying, oh, we're working with a template, got to rewrite view data to accommodate that. Then the helpers that are inside of that template, when they go to name themselves, the first thing they're going to do is see if they're inside of a template by asking the template info class. If they are, they're going to say, well, what should my name be? And then some routine's going to go off and say, your name should be this. I know this is a bit confusing, and I know maybe what the next question might be on the tip of your tongue. What if I monkey with the naming? And you sure can, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. All right, well, finally, what we're going to do is we're going to head down here into execute template, and all this really does is come down here, and you end up asking the view engine result view.render, which we've already covered before, and it's going to render itself right out to the stream. Woo! Well, that ends our field trip. It wasn't the easiest thing, but I think we got through it okay. I always enjoy field trips, even if they burst my bubble when it comes to, oh, the belief in magic. But one of the cool things that we talked about was the template info class and how to get the name. And you can actually jack into that if you want to. Oh, again with the assembly directive. We can come in here and say HTML, or excuse me, view data. And then we can ask for template info. And then inside of here, you can see, we can say get full HTML field name. That's the thing that is being used internally. So if I open this up, I can also enter the partial field name, but I don't want to do that just yet. I'm just going to put in emptiness. And I'm going to pop in this, say, hey, So just to show you that this works, if I refresh and pull the browser back over again, there we go. Hey, looky, published on. So that should be the name of all the inputs that are on the page. So let's take a look and see if that's the case. If I open this source and come down here, and we're looking for our text box, and the ID is published on, name is published on. Hey, looky. Okay, so let's do one last thing, and I'm going to come in here just to make sure that we know this is working. I'm going to say enter a date. Great. Okay, so let's go back to our page. And now, when I refresh this, Editor 4 is going to find the template, and it's going to output it onto the page, including transferring down the model information. Woohoo! Okay, well, all that big talk about jQuery, well, let's enter some of it in. Now, let's do that. Okay, so let's go back over to the Create page here, and I'm going to enter in my scripts. Here we go. Now, you can put this script information anywhere you like. I just happen to like to put it right here on the page I'm going to be using it on. So in here, I have two script links. One to, of course, jQuery 132, which comes, by the way, with, here it is, it comes with the project template. And then also I downloaded jQuery UI 172, and finally I downloaded jQuery UI's CSS. So I've added links to those right here. Finally, if you're not familiar with jQuery, this is going to look a little strange to you, but this is the way you actually tell jQuery, hey, when the body loads up, when the document's ready, I want you to carry this stuff out. This notation right here is the selector syntax, if you will. It's sort of supposed to be an S. Go and select this value. Go select the document. And in this case, I'm saying go select the CSS class date selector and apply date picker to it. Now, I should stop right here and say that we could have absolutely applied this right in line here, and I could have just come in and said new, and then added some HTML attribute, including the class date selector, and it would have worked just fine. But then we wouldn't really have a very cool templating demo, would I? Okay, well, I'm almost there. Now that we have date selector applied, what I'm going to want to do is come back here in my model, and now come in here and just say new, and then it's going to be an object whether I like it or not. New, and then I'm going to say class, and you got to use the @ symbol because class is a reserved word. @ means ignore, and I'm going to set this to date selector. Okay, that's all we need to do. And so now if I refresh this, no, it doesn't look like that much has changed until I click. And now I have a calendar. Woo! That's pretty slick stuff. We have just templated our entire date inputs. I think that's kind of cool. So you might be sitting there thinking, what's the big deal? I don't really care about that. How does it really apply to me? How does it help me out? This seems like a lot of extra code just to avoid putting a little bit of a class tag right here. Well, the answer is, now that we've set up our template for all the date time types, if we continue using templating in our pages, which we can do, we can come right in here now and we can simply just say html.editor4model, which I think I just showed. But now when we come back here and I refresh this, I will have the same old gross input, but check it out. For every date, I now have a templated input. That's pretty hot, don't you think? Well, we're not quite done yet. We can do a few more things here with these editor templates. They don't have to handle necessarily just primitive types. We can do a few more things with it, including, let's come back over here. I'm going to back my way out of this just for a second. I'm going to leave that there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add in another view. And this time I'm going to call it post. There we go, and create a partial like that. And then I'm going to create a strongly typed view. And there we go, add that in. Okay. So now that we have this, I can go back here, drop that in. Notice I'm still using the editor 4 right here. Now what I can do is I can come back here and reset this to be editor 4. There we go. Cool beans. Now I actually have an editor 4 type of post. So I come back in here, I refresh this, and there it is. So I have my editor back, which is kind of cool, and I even have my built-in templates. Templates within templates. It's pretty groovy. All right, well that is how to bind complex model item, but there's a couple other things that we might want to figure out. Specifically, what about this guy right here, this drop-down? it's sort of it's left out in the cold a little bit in terms of all these editors. And to show you that, if I come back in here into my post and I just type in editor 4, so the editor for the category ID, what happens when I do this? And I refresh that, and this is going to turn out to be nothing. That's not very fun. Where is my dropdown? How does this handle dropdowns? Well, you'd think I'd be able to come back in here and say, hey, give me an editor template for category ID. No, the type. That's what I mean. I mean the type. Oh, that's an integer. Oh, can't really do an editor for an integer. There's a way around this. And you can use data annotations and some binding information. I'm going to show you that right now. Well, up until now, we've been working with the very simple approach to working with the editor templates. And what I want to do right now is I want to actually dive a bit deeper and show you how you can do some fun things using data annotations. So for right now, what I want to focus on is switching over the category drop-down list to be templated. So if I come back over here to my input page, you can see everything's working as it should. But the minute I change it over from drop-down list to editor 4, and then I got to change this argument away from a string, and I'm going to set this to category ID. There we go. What the templating system is going to do is going to look for an integer, because that is the type that this is right here. Unfortunately, it does not try and look for anything under a property name. So if I refresh this, it'll find that it's an integer and say, here you go, here is a text box. Thank you very much. Well, that's not exactly what I need. I need to have something better than that. Well, the cool thing I can do is I can come in here and I can add another template. And what I'll do is I'll just add a new template here, and I'll call it category drop down. All right, and this is going to be partial view, and it is not going to be typed, and I'll hit add. Okay, well, once again, it doesn't need to be typed because this is going to be handed an integer. It knows it's going to be an integer, so we can just work straight up with model. Remember, model is an object which hangs on view data, so we don't really need to have it typed if we're working with a situation like this. So what I'm going to do in here is sort of the same thing I did. This time that assembly directive is not going to get me. Sort of the same thing I did with the date picker, except now I'm just going to say html.dropdownList and leave it empty. Cool. All right, well, that's neat. So this is where the magic starts. How do I get this thing to work? Well, back here in my create page, back here in my post template, what I can do is I can actually specify the template I want to use. Template name. Let me see if I can pull this over so you can see it. Yep, template name. And in this case, the template name is pretty simple. Category dropdown. Category dropdown. That was a dog. Okay, and then I can come over here and I can hit refresh. And now what I should see is something entirely cool. And I do. Boom. All right. Well, how is that working? Magic. I know a lot of people out there might be scratching their heads. I don't understand this. Well, the cool thing about templates is that once you specify what they are, they're going to fire. And they're going to say, well, what am I working with? And remember, we're binding this against this model right here. Against that property, excuse me. Once the category dropdown gets a hold of it, it says, okay, I'm a dropdown list. And I'm going to be working against the model. It's just what it does by default. Remember, the title is given to it by the editor, or the editor for method. So it's given a title. In this case, the title is category ID, because that's what it's an editor for. So it knows its name. And by default, as you guys remember, the drop-down list works with convention. If you give it a name, it'll go look for that name in the view data. And if it sees an IEnumerable in there, it'll try and cast it to select list and see if it works. In this case, it does, because that's precisely what we're doing back here on our home controller. If you recall from the previous episode, there it is, view data category ID. Boom, it all just works. Magic, I'm telling you, magic. That's more like convention. All right, so let's go back in here. And now we got editor 4 working with category ID. But a lot of people are going to look at this and go, ick, do I really have to do that? And the answer is no, you do not. And this is where we're going to start diving into a little bit more detail and a little bit more magic. What I want to do now is I want to transition here into working with data annotations a little bit. And this is where I might lose a few of you, because a lot of people who are going to watch us, who are fairly strict about their model and about software development, might say, I do not want any attributes on my classes that dictate anything to do with the UI. And that's perfectly cool. I will tell you, though, that the more complex your application gets, the more you're going to be working with models dedicated to the UI, view models, if you will. All right, well, the architectural decision is yours. This is a tool that you can use or not. It doesn't need to be used by default at all. Okay, so what do I need to do here? Well, what I need to do is I need to work with my link to SQL classes. This deals with a post. This is an editor for a category ID. This editor here, this whole post works with blog.data.post. So I need to get in there and I need to tell category ID something special. I need to tell it that it's got to go grab that specific template every time it's being edited, because I don't want to have to put this comma/category dropdown every single time I use this editor for. All right, well, how do I do that? Well, let's crack open a class here. We're going to add a new one, and I am going to just call this post. There we go. And inside here, what I could do is I could just drop this open, and I should actually make sure of two things. This needs to be the exact same namespace as my model because I'm going to create this as a partial class. Okay, and for those of you who do not know what a partial class is, it's brand new to, I believe, 2.0, and allows you to kind of buddy up classes, split them in half, if you will. So to us, these are in two different files. To the compiler, they are the exact same thing. And to illustrate what I mean, I can create a constructor here, and if I type in this dot, you can see I have a lot of properties in there, a lot of fun things. All right, groovy. So what I can do now is I could simply come in here and I could say, hey, you know that property that you have on you, category ID? Well, you know what I want to do? I want to tell you to, every time you are working with the UI, I'm going to give you a little hint. Here's a UI hint for you. And I'll hit Control period. You got to use system.componentModel.Data Annotations. If you're using jQuery, if you're using MVC 2.0, this should already be in your references. So yes, I want that. UI hint, and all I've got to do in here is to say use category drop down. There it is, UI hint. Pretty cool. All right, well, that'll work, sort of. The templating system will pick this up just fine. The problem comes in when I hit build. Ew, compiler crashes. I can't do that. Problem is because I've generated this class, and this is where the problem comes in. I've generated this class. Even though it is a partial, I can't rework any of the properties here. Well, what we can do to get around this issue is a little bit of compiler trickery. And I don't even need to use partials for this, which is exciting. So what I can do is I can come in here and I can say public class, and then I can call this, let's call it post MD, which is kind of a convention used by the dudes at Microsoft, post metadata. And then I can just take this right here and drop it down. All right, that's neat. Well, what does this get me? Well, it gets you sort of a proxy class, if you will, that you're going to put little UI stuff on. So what I can do now is I can come up here and I can add an attribute to my partial class, and I can say metadata type, and then I can pass in type of. So look for your metadata on this other type, which is post MD. Okay, done deal. All right, compile it. Compiler's happy. I haven't really changed the class. All I'm doing inside of, well, I'm not doing anything aside from saying, hey, you know that this partial class, go find the metadata somewhere else. And then I've created this metadata class, and I should be good to go as long as I'm keeping things with the same names. A little bit more convention magic. All right, let's go back to the post here. It's still got HTML editor 4. Notice I've removed the template specification. But now if I come back here and hit refresh, UI hint is in place, and we get our dropdown. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? Well, there's lots more that I can do, as you can imagine. So let's take a look at some of those things. Specifically, let's take a look at this. The multi-line text area here, as well as this weird output that says body. Now, of course, I can come in here and I can just change body, but that doesn't really play along with the editor idea here, this templating system. So what I want to do is I'm going to see if I can rely on some templating for that. So what I can do is I can just output this as a label. I can say, make me a label, will you? And I can do that just like that. All right, so I got label 4, and now instead of doing big box, which uses my helpers, which works just fine, I might want to do something specific for the input for a post. I could even use one of those rich text editors if I wanted to, but for right now, I'm simply just going to ask for an editor. and I'll leave that to myself later on. And then I'm going to ask X for body. There we go. Okay. Great. Now I'm using the templating system to display my body information here. And if I show this, woo, yucko. One of the interesting things that I got, though, is I got the word body back, and it's just because it's the name of the property. But I got a text box here with nothing in it and hardly enough space to do much of anything. Well, what can I do? Now, the cool thing is I can, once again, crack into the data annotations and cajole the templating system by putting in some annotations. Let's see how you do that. I'm going to open up my post class one more time. All right, so in this, remember, you don't want to be editing directly against the partial class here because it won't work. What you need to do is just create your properties here on your metadata buddy class. And so that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to enter in a string, and I'm going to call it body. Cool. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to set it up so it is multi-line. It is a text area. So to do that, I have to tell it it's a specific data type. And I do that by entering the data type attribute. And it's going to ask me, what kind are you? And then I get to enter data type again because it's an enumeration. And if I hit dot, this is where some interesting things pop up. Look at this. I'm going to pull this down a little bit. Sorry, I pulled down the wrong window. There we go. Currency, custom. Look at that. Duration, email address, HTML, multi-line text, which is the one I want, phone number. I think that's pretty neat. URL. All right. Well, there's lots of default formats that the team has already added in for this. I'll show you some of those in just a bit. But for right now, I want to tell it that it's multi-line text. And so if I do that and hit Control-Shift-B to compile, come back over here and refresh this. Now that I've told the data annotations, look at that. I have a nice text area, which is pretty groovy. That's pretty cool. I can do a little bit more as well. I can fix this body. It doesn't make much sense. Let's add something a little bit more meaningful in here. And to do that, I can add in another attribute. And so what I can do is I can type in display name. And to get at this, I need to add another reference to system.componentModel. And so I'll add that using statement in. And then I just add in what the display name will be. And so I will say, oh, something like, say something worthwhile. Now close off that attribute, Control-Shift-B to build, come back to our page, and now if I refresh this, I have just tweaked the label. Say something worthwhile. That's pretty neat. Working with the templating system when creating editors is good fun, but we've only shown half the stories so far. And what I want to do now is to show you really quickly what you can do for displays, because ASP.NET MVC 2.0 comes with the ability to have display templates as well as edit templates. But I will throw out the caveat right now that I am not going to dive too deeply into the display templates just yet. I'm going to save that for when we're working with the model. We'll dive deep into data annotations and all the other things you can do. So to illustrate what is possible, let's go over here to the home page one more time. And here on the home page, I have added some links to link off to a details action. And details will show an individual post. So if we come back over here to the home controller, you can see that here is the details action. And it just simply reaches in and grabs a post based on the ID that is passed in. Okay, well, let's add a view. And this time I'll use the tooling. I'll hit an add view here. Details, and we're going to do a strongly typed view, and we're going to make sure that it is typed to the post class. This time I'm going to let it create some HTML for me, and I'll hit add. So you can see what is popped out here. It is, well, you can see display fields, HTML encoding, and then model post ID. It's all pretty basic stuff, something you typically see on any starter or scaffolded details page. So now if we come over here, hit go, we can now see a very bland output. Well, what if I wanted to get rid of all this stuff? I sure could. And let's just do that. I'm going to get rid of everything, as a matter of fact. And now what I can do is, as you would imagine, do the exact same thing we've been doing for the editor, except this time, instead of editor for model, I'm going to use display for model. And that's it. So I'll hit save. And then if I come back over here and refresh my page, you'll see that, well, you get the exact same thing except minus the field set. It's because, as I've been mentioning before, the tooling, the T4 templates, uses the exact same templating as the core default templates that come with ASP.NET MVC2. So this is something that's really important to catch. There are a lot of default templates for type outputs with ASP.NET MVC. You saw when I hit Editor 4, well, it decided that you needed a text box for a string, and you needed a text box for outputting of a number as well. And we overrode those settings using Data Annotations. Well, we can do the same thing with this display here. In fact, if I right-click and we come in here and view the source, let's go and view the source. You come down, you can see display field is our class, display label. Everything is almost exactly the same. Another thing to note here is the label for the body of the post. Remember, this used to say body. For the editor, I changed the display name back in our post class. If I head back over here into our post class, and I changed the display name over here to say something worthwhile, well, that display also carried through to here. And this is all the model metadata at work, working directly with the data annotations and attributes that you throw onto your model. Lots of good stuff happening here. And once again, I will go into extreme detail on this during the episode in which we discuss the model.